All right, so French knots. Now, French knots are my absolutely favorite stitch. I love them. I love what they can do to a pattern. But I think if you ask any stitcher the first time they tried a French knot, it was basically a mess. So I'm going to show you a few of the tricks that I've learned along the way that have made them so much easier. And then I'm going to show you the 3 knots, the example. You'll work on these, and then we'll talk about how they all, the number of wraps and the number of strands changes the look. Okay, so we're going to come up from the back of the fabric right through the center. You're going to grab this thread with your non-dominant hand. You're going to hold your needle in your other dominant hand, and you're going to make almost like a T with them. And you can go from this direction or you can go from this direction. It doesn't matter which way you wrap it. It's kind of a personal preference. So if you have something that comes more naturally to you, do it that way. So I'm going to go this direction. I'm going to go around 1, 2. Oh, sorry, that's not true. I'm going to go around 1. So 1. So once we've came back, we're done that. So this is the part where I think people have the most trouble. How do I get this knot down here? I'm holding it really tight. How do I do that? So I can let the tension go, keeping it in it still a knot, a wrap, push my needle down through the fabric, and I'm not holding onto this as long as it's still twisted there. But what I need to do is I need to get it down to the surface of the fabric. And once I've pulled this thread, it'll slide that knot down. Once you've done that, it should stay pretty much where it's supposed to be. But you want to just gently hold that kind of in place. And then you'll push your needle through, pull from the back, and it should, and I like to hold it kind of there just so that if any knots right here happen, they don't affect this knot here. And then you just gently pull till it goes through. So the shorter your thread, the easier it is to do French knots, because when I was pulling it through at the end of there, that's probably the time where you're going to end up with the most potential for a knot, and then a knot in your thread as it's trying to go through the knot is going to create a mess that you can't fix. So around 1, 2, I'm holding this with not a ton of tension, but enough. I can let it go and it still stays as long as I pull it back to where it needs to be. But that's not the part I'm focusing on right now. Right now, I'm pushing my needle down beside. Okay? And then once I've done that, I'm going to give this a tug and I'm going to slide it down to the surface of the fabric. I'm going to hold it, push my needle, grab it from the back, pull it through. This is the part where as I'm going nice and slow, so that my thread doesn't knot, and I've created a little French knot. Not quite on the spot where it was supposed to be, but it's done. Okay, and as you can see, it's a little bit bigger than the one above it. Okay, and then my last one, 3 wraps. 1, 2, 3. And the same thing, I'm holding this tension, but I don't need to hold it super tight. I just need to put... So here's, I think, what happens to some people is if I put my needle on this side, it feels like it's unwrapping, right? Okay, I've wrapped this 1, 2, 3 times, and I want to keep my thread from unwrapping. But this won't unwrap it, whichever side you have it on. That's, as long as you're holding this thread right here, it shouldn't come unwrapped. Okay, so I can push my needle through the fabric, slide the knot down to the base of the fabric. Before I've pulled my needle, push my needle all the way through, you can pull that down. And then once it's sitting there, I can pull my needle through. But if your knot isn't at the surface of your fabric before you pull this through, it won't work the right way. That knot needs to be touching the surface of the fabric before you pull the thread and the needle through. If it's not, you're going to end up with something, let's see if we can do an example. You're going to end up with something like this. A big floppy, not tight knot. And that's because all of your tension in your knot wasn't gone before you pulled it through. So controlling with your non-dominant hand, that portion is going to be probably one of the most important things to the success of your French knots. So it is a 2-handed stitch. Obviously not everyone is going to have a stand to hold your French knots, but you can just put your hoop on the surface of like a table, put a heavy book or a computer on top of the edge like I have where mine's clipped, lay that on there to weigh it down, and then you should be able to create your own kind of like hoop stability so that you can use both hands. Okay, before we finished, I wanted to show you guys what our one strand would be like, which is going to be probably the most difficult one. And I don't know where we would use one strand, but it is something to try. So with one strand, we're going to be doing the exact same technique, but I've got one strand. And then the thing for me is that you've got to go through far enough of a space so that your whole needle doesn't come through your hole. You just have to. You can't go super close to the other hole or else that knot's going to pull right through. There just isn't a thick enough knot to hold it from coming through. And then we're doing the same thing. We've pulled our knot down and we're going really slowly. And you want to pull, but I don't want you to pull so hard that you do pull it through the hole that your needle made. The needles are only so thin. This is our smallest needle, and it's still not as thin as one strand of thread. It just can't be because then it would break in half. So one wrap, one strand knot is going to be very tiny and would have the potential to pull right through the hole that your needle created. So we're sliding our 2 wrap down, pushing it through, and then again, we're gently pulling till we feel the tension, but we're not pulling it all the way through that hole. And then our 3 wrap. So this is a tiny little knot. They're very cute, and they'd be great for something like tiny little accents of eyes on something, like, or the dot on lettering on the eye. You need a tiny little dot. It's going to be your one strand, one wrap. So those are done. I'm going to meet you back when all these are done, and we'll chat about it and talk about how all of them look and how they look in relation to each other. Okay, so now that we've completed all of our French knots, let's just take a look at kind of the different knot sizes and what they can be used for. I think the most interesting thing is how different wraps and sizes, you're gonna have some crossover. So for example, like a 3 wrap, 3 strand looks very similar to a 6 strand 1 wrap. I said that backwards. Same with like these two here, a 2 strand 1 wrap and a 2 wrap 1 strand. So they're all going to be like, they're going to blend. They're not going to all look exactly the same. Obviously your largest size is going to be your 6 strand 3 wrap. But anyways, it's interesting to see the gradual progression and how different strands match other strands and wraps, which is kind of cool. But why would we use 3 strands with say 3 wraps when we could just use 6 strands with 1 wrap? And I honestly think the answer is going to be 2 things. One of 2 things. It's going to be needle size. So if you're working with a needle that fits 6 strands better than it fits 3 strands, you want your needle size to match the most during French knots, because if you have too big of a needle and you wrap your thread around it and you try to pull it through, the knot is the needle size. So that wrap that you do creates the knot. And when you pull the thread through the knot, the size of the coil that you've created for the knot is always going to be the size of the needle. So if it's too big on, say we use a huge needle on a 1 wrap, you're going to end up with just this loop with a string pulled through it. So you want to match your needle size. If you're using with a needle that fits 6 strands better, wrap with 6 strands. And then of course, like if you already have 3 strands on your needle and you have to do French knots, you probably don't want to take them off and turn it into a 6 strand situation if you can avoid it. So that would be another reason that we might choose to do one over the other. And you kind of have to figure that out. Obviously a pattern will tell you what to use. For my patterns, try to keep some consistency. So if I'm working with 3 strands, I'll try to use 3 strands for the same element. So you aren't having to change how many strands you have on your needle all the time. But that may be different for different patterns. And it may also come into like, if you're wanting a really big knot, you might need a 6-strand 3-wrap knot. So again, it's all going to depend on your current situation and the outcome and the desire that you're looking for.